I tend to probably get a little bit technical in my head about thinking about how we could solve these problems, but these problems are always going to be here, aren't they? They're technically always going to be, because customers that are aware of, you can report you to gas safe or whatever, and things like that, they'll kind of use that. If you're doing the job right, you're not too bothered about that. We have been caught at a couple of times. We do too many jobs, I'm sure you have, to not to be, but that's part of the learning curve. But I think consumer, we always say to them, like, someone's gas safe, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get somebody in your property that's going to be to a level. It's like, it's like jumping in a Lamborghini at 17. You can still have the same driving license. I do believe experience is a big thing. We're going a bit off the tail here, aren't we? But ultimately, gas safe, with what you were saying, is giving the customers and the reassurance and the engineers and how it's trained. I think someone like myself who's dyslexic and struggle with processing information from books is very pressurized for me, and I can honestly say, hand on heart, I've done my gas safe several times, etc., and I can't see anything that's brought value at this point in my life from that course apart from stress, because ultimately it's the same stuff that I'm learning with a very tweaks along the way. Whereas I think if I was to run a platform like that, I'd probably integrate a lot more technology in. I think like I could help your company, if Gas Safe had an app and you could ask a question, people would ask the question to the app. If you literally, how many of your lads or my lads drive around with the whole bench full of books, it just doesn't happen. So I think there is innovation that should be passed in. It probably will happen, to be fair, into oil gas safe as we go on. Hopefully it will. People like yourself and people have got really good companies, got big opinions, these opinion count. I think that would help the industry, because rather than expecting lads to look for information through books, unfortunately digital world's here and we're not doing that anymore, and I think the gas industry and industries need to catch up with that. What's your opinion on that?
Yes, I think if a governing body such as MCS or Gas Safe encompassed all the different technologies, and as I said earlier, kept the skill there, kept the invoice amount where you need to invoice, not your painter and decorator kind of value. I just think we struggle with Gas Safe at the minute, and they always seem to have technical issues. They don't seem to be technically very advanced as a organisation, and obviously they may well be behind the scenes, but the site's always breaking. You go register, it's broken, you've got an integration through where you register your boilers or you try and do it direct. I reckon once a month, twice a month, probably more, that you cannot register products because the Gas Safe site's down. So I think if they're looking to transition to look after every technology, or if MCS is doing it, I think they actually need to invest into their systems to make it easier for people to register products and to see service histories and stuff like that. You can go and have your car MOT'd and you can get a history of it. I mean,
you can on a one database, but they've only just probably done that, haven't they, over the last probably 10 or 15 years, because before that you could get an MOT and it was like 20,000 miles on, and then you have one for 250 miles on it. The same with the boiler, that, because literally you could get a friend that and we've not had your boiler up today, just write the dates.
You make it up
digitally on a system. It can't be made up.
No, I mean, no, because if it was logged at the time it was done, it's done by,
timestamps, right.
But you could essentially just make up. When the manufacturer got an under guarantee issue, you ring them up, we need to see proof that you've had it serviced. You could just go onto your computer and make it yourself and make the company name up and just say they don't exist anymore, but they did it last year.
Installer unknown, it's called that, isn't it? So what if, so I know that in peak we discussed 2,500. We're going to deal with some of the people that commented on that on our next podcast. 2,500 boilers. So we did go off a little bit tail then, because I tend to, all these podcasts are not what's the word? Scripted, nothing scripted. It's literally whatever I'm thinking and I'm speaking, and I just think it flows better that way. But ultimately, going back to the 2,500 boilers you installed to the 1,000 you're installing now, I just want to explain to people, when it was, say, 2018, would it be fair to say you was doing them sort of numbers?
I know it was post-COVID, so okay. 22, 23.
Sorry, pre-COVID, were you doing around about 1,000?
Yeah.
So I think
roughly
the reality of what's happened, a lot of companies, there's been obviously a COVID boom afterwards. So I think you took on contracts, there was a shortage. Let's face it, lots of companies set up around COVID that went and got vans, expanded,
Yeah.
but won't survive because their expansion rate was based, and the whole business was based on COVID.
Yeah.
So now when it's dipping, they don't know how to deal with that because
Yeah.
they've gone through a process of system, whereas you'll be okay because you've had a consistent flat line of work in your company, to deal with the ups and downs with the team, etc. But when you're talking from a massive drop in turnover, that must be, I don't know, is it about 3 or 4 million quid drop that?
Well, yeah. So last year, so we were doing a lot of contracting work, and we were predominantly contracting it out. But with the contractors, they were predominantly on either 3, 4, or 5 days. Some were doing 6. And it got to the point where, so we got a baseline level of engineers and directly employed engineers. Generally, they're all in our vans. No, they are all in our vans, in our uniform, and we kind of that side of the business. But then we kind of diversified a little bit into looking into contracts, like where sources of work would come from, and building relationships up. And then we were kind of at a point where the COVID numbers were so high for some big nationals.
Just to be clear, it means boilers here and stuff, not actually COVID numbers.
Yeah, sorry. That we were onboarded quite quickly with a few large companies, and we started to then subcontract the work out. So we played middle man. It was all legit, everybody knew what was going on. And we got up to, we were sort of registering around 2,500 gas products a year, predominantly boilers, obviously. And we got to a point where the numbers started to drop. There's a minimum number of boilers we need to do on a contracting, because the expectation is there's an auditor, there's a manager, there's office admins, there's a bunch of overheads that come with that pot of work. So we needed a minimum of like 40 boilers a week, 50, whatever it was. And it got to the point where the numbers were dropping below the minimums, and with no sight of it going back up. So this is when the work started to really quieten down. So because we understand our numbers and know what we need to come in and what's going out, we just cut that line of work. It was like, well, if the numbers are not going to go up, it answers its own question. We're below the minimum we need just to pay its way. It's not so bad in the summer if you're ticking over and your goal is, for us, is to level peg, because if we're taking out what we take out, we take our salary, and everybody does okay out of the business. As long as we're level pegging through the quiet months, we make a bit more through the winter. That's our approach.
That's always been. That's exactly ours.
But this year is, we've had a focus. We only last week, the week before, we've sat around in our meeting room in our office, and we were looking at ways to increase the low. So rather than having peaks and troughs, which has such a detrimental impact to cash flow and to, obviously the amount of money that comes in. So we were looking at other ways. We do a lot of solar PV with our custom electric and air conditioning and things like that. So we're starting to put the groundworks in now in November, ready for the low that will come. We're predicting sort of April time. So when the boilers start to drop off, the PV and AC starts to increase. So all the marketing plans and all the ideas around how we're going to generate all of that work will start to play out. And we're not doing it when it's a problem. We're doing it months in advance, so we can really start to get some good foundations in. So our plan is for the quiet periods is to try and minimise that gap between high and low. It also impacts quite a lot on engineer numbers, because when you've got such a low and you've got so many engineers that you need to keep busy, and you get a low, they end up, your gas engineers are helping fit solar panels and stuff.
That's what I was going to say. Just to use, like we was talking about this earlier, wasn't it, before this conversation? The biggest issue we have is probably May through to September, where it is a bit sketchy. People are on holiday, etc. And ultimately your engineers haven't got to do. So like you mentioned about upskilling with training, etc., going into different products, different verticals in the business, which really helps. But I think that's a key point, where if you've got like a heating engineer that can go off with the electricians and pull cables and help him, and he's learning as well, and it's not that much indifferent to doing pipe, really.
Yeah, I mean, some of the engineers don't like doing that. They're employed as gas engineers and they want to be fitting gas boilers, but some are okay. So
I understood that, mate.
No. So our plan is to actually get a group of the gas engineers and say, actually, if we're quiet in the summer, would you consider PV? They said that they're okay with that. We'll then train them up before the summer comes around. So come the summer, we're ready to attack it. But that's obviously an issue, a challenge we've had, is managing the highs and lows, and going from, all of our work is private domestic work now that we find ourselves, whereas before an element of it when we were doing the higher numbers was contracted work and our own work. It was a blend of both. We almost treated them as two separate businesses in our minds. So one was looking after the private domestic, directly employed engineers in our vans, the full service with the text messages would come in, the remind, all that kind of stuff. And then this was like a bolt-on. And we knew the bolt-on didn't work, hence why they're subbies. So the reason, right at the start, before we got too involved with it, we didn't go and buy vans. We didn't employ loads of people other than the people you needed in the office, which was 3. So we subcontracted it model so that we knew that if anything got a bit weak or the numbers didn't come through, we could just cut it off. Mm-hmm. That's exactly what we did. So we knew that we couldn't do lower than X amount of boilers. I think it was 40 or 50 a week or something like that. And as soon as we got below that number, that's when it went, yes.